Hey guys, we are going to pick up where we left off on Friday. If you recall, it was a exciting day going through ancient Greece. We looked at the Minoan culture, the Mycenaean culture. I'm going to show you a quick video and sit and relax down here in the corner of your screen as we watch through it, and it will get us caught up to where we were. If you're like me, you slept between now and then. You may have forgotten some of it. So let's watch this. I may pause it every now and then because I like to talk and add to the video. It will get us caught up in our story of ancient Greece, and then we're going to jump into today's lesson. Here we go.
We might think we already know everything about ancient Greece. The Parthenon, the 300 Spartans, and blind Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are familiar to all. Yet there were far more than 300 Spartans. The Parthenon was actually built as a kind of central bank, and no such unified state as ancient Greece with Athens as its capital ever existed. The Trojan War was as distant in time to Alexander the Great as the Vikings are to ourselves. So let's try to get our heads around ancient Greece, and hopefully a little quicker than in 2,000 years.
So we'll stop here, and just as a reminder, as his timeline, I think here is going to show us the time between the ancient Greeks and the freaks, as someone called it on Friday. I believe that's you, Leon. Shout out, holler. The pre-Greeks is actually a super long time. Our pre-Greeks are going to be living back in the same era as the ancient Egyptians. Again, we got when it comes to ancient history, we have many stories happening all along the same multiple timelines, and generally speaking, in that same part of the world. And so, just a reminder: we're going to jump back in time, back to the Babylonians, the Egyptians, that era.
3,716 years ago, the pyramids of Egypt were already standing, and Babylon was the world's first megapolis, home to a prototype of the Tower of Babel. On Crete, however, a mysterious civilization was flourishing. It had three-story.
Boom! We talked about this one, the Palace of Knossos. A three-story building built back in the ancient world. Built so intricately, it is said that if you found yourself in the hallways and didn't know how to get out, you couldn't get out. This place is, I'm kind of in love with it.
Palaces, and all this with no defenses. The Cretans apparently led a relatively.
We talked about no defenses, and that's because they didn't need any. The Cretes lived on an island. The ocean was its defense. And no one was trying to overrun them at that time.
Peaceful life, admiring flowers, blue monkeys, and beautiful women, walked around topless, while the men preferred loincloths or skirts. The Cretans had a navy and their own writing system, and nobody has yet succeeded in deciphering them. Until...
Okay, kind of one of those cool things. This is linear A writing. We have no idea how to read this. In the same vein of thought as the Indus Valley language, we just don't know what it means. We know what a few of the symbols mean. We can make great guesses based on what we know about the society, based on the archaeological remains going back to the 1800s. But by and large, we have no idea what this says. And so one day, 50 years from now, we may figure this out, and it might reshape the story of the Minoans. But right now, we just don't know.
One day, on the island of Thera, the modern-day wedding paradise of Santorini, all this ended in the greatest volcanic eruption in European history. Part of Thera sank beneath the waves, presumably giving rise to the myth of Atlantis. Tsunamis 100 meters high and vast ash clouds stretching for thousands of miles around. Crete never recovered from this eruption, and invaders soon swarmed in. The once peaceful island then filled with bronze weapons and tablets written in a new, strange language, which turned out to be the earliest known form of Greek, spoken by warlike tribes, which had settled the nearby Greek mainland, building such cities as Thebes, Athens, Mycenae, and Pylos. But these cities already sheltered behind 6-meter walls. Life here was not peaceful at all.
Boom. So now we have the Mycenaean culture. Sort of a war-loving tribe-ish culture that came from the north and found a wounded animal that had just been devastated by natural disaster, and then takes it over. The Mycenaeans, they rule for a couple hundred years in this Greek Mediterranean area. And here is the same picture I showed you guys in class called the Lion's Gate, one of the coolest archaeological achievements that I could find aesthetically. Really have no idea what it is. It's just kind of cool to look at. I believe this is that because they were a warring society, they were often scared that they themselves would be overran or attacked. So this is what you're seeing is a defensive wall. And this is just connecting two different defenses.
A few centuries later, the Greeks themselves explained them with legends of cyclopean builders and were no longer aware that any other civilization had come before them on Crete. By this logic, even the half-bull Minotaur was half Greek. Nobody batted an eyelid at the fact that games with bulls were a purely Cretan form of entertainment. Greeks appropriated everything they met on their way with great virtuosity. In conquering Crete, they had conquered the seas. Marine trade saw them grow even richer. Almost all the inscriptions found among the heaps of gold in the tombs of Mycenae are financial accounts. Mycenae took the lead in the fight against Troy in Homer's Iliad. As recently as 150 years ago, this story was considered a fairy tale, until a millionaire and amateur archaeologist, Heinrich Schliemann, excavated Mycenae and Troy, a replica of the legendary Trojan horse.
If you don't know the story of Troy, please do yourself a favor and read about it. It's going to be not something that we're going to be able to cover in this class, but it is forever we believed it to be a myth. An archaeologist actually, though, found the remains that sort of prove at least the story. There are remnants of a burned down city in the area that this is supposed to have happened, that make people believe that the story of Troy and the Trojan horse could have been cool. This is a replica of the Trojan horse. The story goes that a neighboring village sent this horse. The Mycenaeans sent the horse to what is current day Turkey, and they sent it as a gift. Now, this was a gift. Inside the horse were soldiers, and this neighboring town, they received the gift. It's an awesome. It's a darn 30-foot horse. Back in the ancient world, this would be quite way better than a bouquet of roses. What they didn't know is it was a surprise attack. There was a trap door underneath the horse. At night, when the village fell asleep, the soldiers came out, burned the city down. Everyone died, and it goes from a beautiful gift to a horrific ending very, very quickly. It almost seems like one of those stories that would be fairy tale and not true. But now we are starting to believe this actually happened, which makes this terrible-looking amusement park attraction thing look and seem way cooler.
now stands here. Archaeologists have indeed found traces of fire and destructions at Troy, but this was accompanied by the decline of virtually all regional settlements. Unceasing attacks by barbarian tribes turned the whole Mediterranean into a war zone.
Okay, so the Dark Ages hit here. This is when...
The next 400 years were a dark age.
We don't know why exactly, but for about 400 years, between sicknesses, plagues, tribesmen from Northern Europe coming down and taking over, it's like technological achievement just sort of stops. It's as if when it comes to the advancement of the world, and remember I told you on Friday, once we start planting crops and not being hunter-gatherers, technology and culture go rather quickly all around the world. But for some reason, in a time that we call the Dark Ages now, it's just as if someone presses pause. And we don't know exactly why. I've given you some of the reasons why, but we'll continue.
Age. Literacy fell into oblivion, leaving us with nothing to read about the events then taking place. Fortunately, what we do have is Homer. Everybody has heard about the blind poet, the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey. In actual fact, we don't know what Homer looked like, or when he lived, whether he was one man or many. But even though the Iliad and Odyssey were written down after the Dark Ages, the daily routines of its characters take us right back to this time. Odysseus, for instance, was only king by virtue of his larger flocks of pigs and goats. His father slept on the ground in ashes with his slaves. Homer's characters were illiterate and used heads of cattle in place of money. A far cry from Crete and Mycenae with their three-story palaces. What had happened? The Mycenaean civilization was destroyed by the Dorians, who, though Greek, were totally savage. The earlier population either hid in the mountains or fled to the east. Of all the achievements of the previous civilization, the Dorians left only the essentials, the sailing ship and the potter's wheel. It took a further 4 centuries for them to start adding the most primitive depictions of animals and people. At around the same time, the turn of the 9th and 8th centuries BC, the Greeks in Ionia borrowed a completely new alphabet from their Phoenician neighbors. This bore little resemblance to the linear writing styles of Crete and Mycenae. Do you recognize the modern Greek letters?
Okay, and this is where culture begins to pick back up. Beginning with Homer's The Iliad and the Odyssey, a tremendously long and hard to read text. It sort of gives you this depiction of really of a world that has gone back in time. If you caught what he said, they would actually use cattle heads as currency, as opposed to we know the Egyptians were using coined money. In the Dark Ages, things had gone backwards, where they had lost the ability, not the ability, but somehow they lost writing from their culture. They lost, as it said, the pottery and art, and somehow, and that thus they call it the Dark Ages. Now, here, as traveling around the world begins to pick back up, that's when we see, for example, we're going to see our ancient Greeks pick up an idea from the Phoenicians that we now call the alphabet. Perhaps you recognize these letters, and boom. Oh, look what I can do. We have A, B, I'm the E. Look at me roll. And if you've ever wondered where we get the phonetic alphabet from, the word phonetic means sounds. Used to our, when it was Greek hieroglyphics or writing on cuneiform, they would write with symbols that might mean whatever. So I'm going to trade a cow. Here's a cow for your wheat. And here's our symbol for trade. And somehow this writing system would make sense. Only the Phoenicians, though, had a different and way better idea. They said, instead of making symbols to write, let's make sounds that can represent our language. So let's have, I don't know. Oh, whoop. The lights went off. Perhaps this is cooler. Let's have sounds that represent language. So the letter A says ah. Now, anytime we need to say a word with ah, we just put the letter A. The Greek letter A was actually alpha. The Greek letter for B, beta. If you've ever been curious why it's called the alphabet, I just told you. It's because it's the alpha, beta, alphabet. Boom. Just blew your mind. Here we go. Here we go.
The fog of dark ages had started to clear. Only here do we begin to recognize ancient Greece, the country that...
Okay, so I'm having too much fun learning how to play around with these toys. All right, now let's talk. I can't do the dark. I'm sorry. Here we are. Okay, now so we are up now. Let's talk about the actual now ancient Greece that we know of and think of today. Now, first, let's talk about the geography of Greek. If you see it here on the map, it is in this area here. Whoopsie daisy. And it is essentially a jutted out peninsula with many, many islands. It's also, as you can see here in my pictures around it, lots of mountains. And so it is very, very hard to grow agriculture in the way that we think of it for our ancient, our ancient Egyptians growing wheat and our ancient Olmecs growing corn. Those sorts of heavy-duty agricultural achievements, hard to find in ancient Greece. So they had to find different ways to survive. What you also won't find that we found in essentially every single one of our other civilizations is a major river. Every other civilization we've talked about has been in some sort of close to fresh water. Greece does not have that. Instead, Greece is going to be based around salt water. Now, what they do become experts at, and let me move on to the next slide. This gives a better feel for the topography of the land. That means the general idea that Greece was a hard place to live from the standpoint of you weren't going to just have a big, beautiful farm. Now, but it was right on the ocean, and thus they developed a society that was great at two things. A lot more than two things, I'm sorry. But we'll say two things for right now. Number one, they knew how to fish. They became expert fishermen, and that became sort of that became the main source of their diet. They also became, while fishing, became some of the greatest sea travelers of the world. They became master boat builders, master boat drivers. There has to be a better word for that. Boatmaticians. And they began to sort of dominate the sea. Now they would then. They also became great at making cultural achievements and sort of. They became great with their minds. Perhaps one of the very best, at least in the sort of modern ancient world, at being as they then traveled the world across the sea, at collecting other cultures, bringing back the best parts, spreading their own culture around the world. This shows what they were trading. They could grow grapes to make wine. It was known that people all around the world loved themselves some Greek wine. We see that here in the picture. So now they began trading Greek wine for wheat. Like I said, tons of mountains. They became miners and could take iron, other metals like gold and silver from the rock and trade that. And again, because they're here on the ocean and they're right on top of the Mediterranean Sea, they can get to some of the far reaches of the world quickly. They could get all the way over here to the Atlantic, or they could get all the way down here into the Persian Gulf. They could take the Nile River all the way down to the end of the Nile River. They could get up here into the underbelly of Europe. They could get to the Silk Road and travel to Asia if they wanted to. The proximity of Greece to be this ultimate port city is what allowed them so much success as a sea-bearing trading society. They also could trade there. They were known for making olive oil. They were known for, there's something else kind of cool that I'm forgetting, and I'm sure I'll remember it later, and I'll shoot out a cool email to you guys that says that they like trading dates or something. All right, here we go. Let's keep on moving. Now, as the ancient Greeks began, traveling the world, trading their wine, trading everything else, they also bring with them, they bring with them themselves. What they figure out is that through traveling the world, they figure out why don't we colonize the world? Why don't we stay here? This is where colonization kicks in, and they begin forming societies that are going to be located all over the world. Now, this is what we actually call ancient Greece. Now, here's the thing, though, guys. It was not an actual country. Today we talk about Greece as being a country. Back then, it was not a country. It was simply a unified set of city-states, a bunch of cities that identified themselves as Greek city-states, and they sort of were culturally linked. They had a similar, they would have used the same language, many of the same Greek myths, but they were not actually a country. So don't get that part confused. There has to be a way to erase faster. This is the slowest. Wipe screen clear. Boom! Found it! There we go. Here we go. Life's looking good. Okay, now, this idea of Greek city-states. Boom! We are going to call this word a polis, or this is a keyword from your standards. The Georgia State Standard says what you really need to know is to understand the idea that of how a polis is going to operate in Greek society. So, as we've already stated, a polis is just going to be simply its own individual city that is really it's going to have generally mountains around it, is not easily connected to another polis. It's going to be self-governing. So there's not a centralized Greek government that tells them what to do. Everyone sort of goes by their own rules and their own norms, but they will have the same language and the same culture. And again, they will identify themselves as Greeks. Oh, that's the bell. Time to go home, friends. All right, let's continue. Watch this. Swipe it. Now, this is a picture that I found of what a polis might look like. A polis is going to...
What's a polis?
A polis, dear friend, and I'm going to post this online so that you can watch it if you'd like. A polis is a Greek city-state. As you can see, they're generally going to have an acropolis. That's going to be some sort of government building. The acropolis at the Parthenon that many of you may have seen pictures of, it's going to be kind of like a government's city hall. It will also be where they keep all the money, where they might mint money, and it wouldn't be printing money, paper money like we think of today, but it'd be stamping some sort of metal from the mountains with like a Greek A or something like that. I'm filming something here. If you thought I was talking to you.
Oh, I thought you was.
Nope. I'm just trying to keep rolling. Stay natural. Hey, have a good weekend. Now, up here on the mountain, you'll have your Acropolis. This will often be your place of worship. Let's move on. Here's another internet picture that I found of what an Acropolis, of what a polis might look like. Again, small farmlands out here to the side. This is going to have, I like this because, and we haven't started talking about it yet, the Greeks, many of the city-states did fall in love with things like plays and ancient Greek comedies, like quite literally trying to be funny on purpose. No one ever did that before. The Neanderthals didn't tell funny zingers. They didn't just think to themselves, hey, Neanderthal, guess what? The Tyrannosaurus Rex ran across the road. So he didn't have a car, Rex. Oh, holler. I wonder who the first person to try to make their friends laugh was. Well, the first written jokes we have come from the ancient Greeks, and we'll get there. This picture kind of shows that. All right, now, fast forward in time, and there are two polises that we're going to really spend our time focusing on. The polis of Athens, which all of you know very, very well. Not Athens, Georgia, go dog sick 'em, hoo, 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 but Athens, Greece. Sort of the home of government, the way that we think of it in America. I should say the home of democracy, the birthplace of democratic ideas. We're going to go deeper into that idea of whether or not Greece truly was, or Athens truly was, a democracy. Now remember, I'm showing you two separate policies here, but they're going to be completely separate. So I'm almost talking about them like they're two different countries. Athens, they are going to be a warring society. They ain't scared to fight, but they also were far more inclined to want to talk about things like, this is where you're going to have Plato, Aristotle, and our first and Pluto, and the very first people to ask the questions of, why am I here? Why do I exist? Like the deep, like let's think about our feels, man, and let's think about why we're here. Remember, again, this is new stuff. No one before them were thinking about deep, I think, therefore I am, questions about existence. They were just trying to not die. It's really proof that they had made it. When you can stop like thinking about just survival, and you got time to just lay around and think about deep existential questions, you know life is pretty good. Now, here's the thing, though. They practiced a direct democracy where every person had a vote, different than our representative democracy today. Now, when I say everybody had a vote, about that, I actually mean everybody had a vote as long as you were a man, as long as you owned property, as long as you weren't a slave, and as long as you weren't a woman, you were fine to vote. So, of course, this is like 20% of the population, 25% of the population. Oh, you also had to be, you couldn't be an immigrant to Athens. Athens had a real high population of people who were from other areas. Because I said they were such a trading society, oftentimes you would find people who'd come from other neighboring civilizations and come and set up basically a shop in Athens to be able to trade. And so they weren't born in Athens, raised in Athens, and thus didn't have a vote. So I ask you, were they actually a democracy? Only 20 to 25% of the people could vote. kind of an interesting question to ponder that I'd rather ponder with you than across a screen. There was, though, and I love this idea. There was also a council of 500 created that was their way of practicing representative democracy. This council of 500 would meet to talk about certain issues. Now, you did not have to run for the council. You did not have to make a political ad and talk about how bad your opponent is. And did you know that my opponent ate his boogers when he was in 3rd grade? And he's really stupid. And they didn't have debates against each other in which they would stand on stage and just yell at each other. I'm not an idiot. You're an idiot. No, I'm not a liar. I think you're a liar. You're lying about my lying. They didn't do that. Instead, to be part of this council of 500, and this is a beautiful idea, they would actually, if you wanted to participate in government, instead of running, you would just put your name in a hat and say, yeah, I'll do it. Sign me up. Now, more than 500 people would volunteer, and thus they would have a lottery to see if they would pick your name out or you weren't picked out. And if your name got picked, you were automatically on the council of 500. And I cannot help but wonder, is this maybe not a better way of doing government? Because right now, the only way that we can really do government, at least on the federal level, you can't run for public office unless you got the money to be able to support your campaign. Back then, they didn't have to campaign. They just put their name in a hat and crossed their fingers and said, come on, baby, let me join the council. And if you didn't make it, then some other guy who is essentially like you, probably made the same amount of money, probably the same, basically the same life, would have your spot. There have actually been other countries that have started trying to do this as we watch representative democracy in a place like America struggle, and not just America, representative democracies everywhere have flaws. Certainly the Council of 500 is not a perfect one. But that idea of a lottery for representation is a cool one. And I've seen actually schools for school student council for them to do that. And it actually gives voice to people. A lot of kids say they would run. This is fascinating. They would run for things, or they would be happy to be class president. But students say that they don't want to do things like have to run a campaign. They don't want to do things like have to stand up in front of the student body and give a speech about, I promise you can eat all the cookies you want at recess. Please vote for me. Instead, they might just really be good at like leadership from the back, like leadership from an organizational standpoint, from an idea standpoint, but they aren't like charismatic wooers of an audience. And really, that's kind of how we think of someone who's going to be a politician. They're like, they're saying magic words that make you feel the feels and vote for them. A lot of people just don't want to have to play that game. Anyway, okay. Now let us switch over to our second polis called Sparta. This is probably my favorite polis from the standpoint of it's just like, if you were to write a fictional story about a polis, this might be it. Sparta was a warring society. Sparta, let me show you something. I thought I had a cool picture, but I don't. Sparta became obsessed with war. Now, here's why. Their ancestors were warring ancestors. Now, when they would go, and this is typical of the era, when they would go fight another civilization and they would win, they would take their people and take them as slaves. Now, when you have slaves, and it's going to be true if you have me in American history, we're going to tell the same story. If you have slaves, what you are deeply scared of is that while you are sleeping, your slaves are going to wake up and murder you. That is a terrifying idea. Turns out, generally speaking, slaves really don't like their masters. So the Spartan people, they began to own more and more and more slaves because they were so good at military they then thought to themselves, in order to gain control and make sure that we have control of our slaves, let's make our military even better. Then once they made their military even better, they would then use that better military to go fight more societies. When they would win that battle, they would get more slaves. Then they're like, uh-oh, we got more slaves. We got to be better at military to keep ourselves safe from the slaves. As they got better at military, they would then go fight other people and take more slaves. And it became the cyclical effect where they began to just simply focus on pouring all of their love and attention into creating the most ruthless soldiers ever to exist. And they would have their slaves do all the stuff to keep them alive, like run the farms, make the clothing, do all that kind of stuff. And everyone else is focused on war. So you're talking about from the age of 7 and the palace of Sparta. If you were a Spartan boy at the age of 7, you were taken away from your mother and your father, and you were trained to be a soldier. And you would train in some of the most, you can actually, I'm going to show you a video here in a second. They would put you through some of the most rigorous training routines known to mankind. I am such a baby. When I am working outside and like trimming branches and I cut my finger, I almost throw up. Like my pain tolerance is just so 2020-ish. These guys would put themselves through these just painful rituals so that pain was no thought to a Spartan man. And this is going to be a major theme in our story, as it's going to be the army of Sparta that's going to help save the Athens. Now, also, I'm telling you this like I'm like pro Greece, pro Athens, pro Sparta. I could easily tell you the story here in a second from the standpoint of them being the bad guys. It just, because we steal so much culture from the Greece, we tell the story as if they're the good guys. But when they fight the Persians, they're in some ways they're the bad guys. Please understand, history is never black and white, good guys versus bad guys. Like there's also a lot of nuance here that I'm not telling you about how they treated. About how the Spartans treated their slaves, about how Spartans treated their children. I've just brushed aside the fact that in Athens or in Greece, it was common to own slaves. I've just sort of like said that slavery was not a foregone conclusion in other places of the world. Like in Persia, for example, they didn't have slaves. They thought that was an outdated custom already. Let me show you this video on the Spartans, and I may pause it and talk about it if I want to.
In ancient Greece, violent internal conflict between border neighbors and war with foreign invaders was a way of life, and Greeks were considered premier warriors. Most Greek city-states surrounded themselves with massive defensive walls for added protection. Sparta, in its prime, was a different story, finding walls unnecessary when it had an army of the most feared warriors in the ancient world. So what was Sparta doing differently than everyone else to produce such fierce soldiers? To answer that question, we turn to the written accounts of that time. There are no surviving written accounts from Spartans themselves, as it was forbidden for Spartans to keep records. So we have to rely on those of non-Spartan ancient historians, like Herodotus, Thucydides, and Plutarch. These stories may be embellished and depict Sparta at the apex of its power, so take them with a grain of salt. For Spartans, the purpose for their existence was simple: to serve Sparta. On the day of their birth, elder Spartan leaders examined every newborn. The strong, healthy babies were considered capable of fulfilling this purpose, and the others may have been left on Mount Taygetus to die.
Ooh, no! Again, I feel bad for like 5 minutes ago. I was like, the Spartans are so cool. And now we just found out that if babies didn't seem fit to grow up to be awesome warriors, they may have left them to die on a mountaintop. So I don't. Let's just take a nap. History's hard. Okay, let's go.
Every Spartan, boy or girl, was expected to be physically strong, mentally sharp, and emotionally resilient, and it was their absolute duty to defend and promote Sparta at all costs. So in the first years of their lives, children were raised to understand that their loyalty belonged first to Sparta and then to family. This mindset probably made it easier for the Spartan boys, who upon turning 7 were sent to the Agoge, a place with one main purpose: to turn a boy into a Spartan warrior through 13 years of relentless, harsh, and often brutal training. The Spartans prized physical perfection above all else, and so the students spent a great deal of their time learning how to fight. To ensure resilience in battle, boys were encouraged to fight among themselves, and bullying, unlike today, was acceptable. In order to better prepare the boys for the conditions of war, the boys were poorly fed, sometimes even going days without eating. They also were given little in the way of clothing, so that they could learn to deal with different temperatures. Spartan boys were encouraged to steal in order to survive, but if they were caught, they would be disciplined, not because they stole, but because they were caught in the act. During the annual contest of endurance in a religious ritual known as the Diamastigosis, teenage boys were whipped in front of an altar at the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia. It was common for boys to die on the altar of the goddess. Fortunately, not everything was as brutal as that. Young Spartans were also taught how to read, write, and dance, which taught them graceful control of their movements and helped them in combat. While the responsibilities for the girls of Sparta were different, the high standards of excellence and expectation to serve Sparta with their lives remained the same. Spartan girls lived at home with their mothers as they attended school. Their curriculum included the arts, music, dance, reading, and writing. And to stay in peak physical condition, they learned a variety of sports, such as discus, javelin, and horseback riding. In Sparta, it was believed that only strong and capable women could bear children that would one day become strong and capable warriors. To all Spartans, men and women, perhaps the most important lesson from Spartan school was allegiance to Sparta. To die for their city-state was seen as the completion of one's duty to Sparta. Upon their death, only men who died in battle and women who died in childbirth were given tombstones.
Wow.
In the eyes of their countrymen, both died so that Sparta could live. Young Spartans were also taught how to read, write, and dance, which...
A couple takeaways here. One, they were taught how to dance. They're going to do the most horrific things imaginable to these children. They're going to starve them, not give them clothing, and freeze them and leave them to the elements. They're going to beat them mercifully so they don't feel pain. They're going to teach them how to steal. I did not tell you. I also read an account that as sort of their last test before becoming a warrior, when you were a teenager, you would go out at night, and your mission was to murder a slave and not get caught. Now, if you got caught, again, you were in trouble, not for trying to murder a slave, but instead for getting caught. And so these men, these boys are turned, they are trained to be the most barbaric men alive, and they can dance. So this picture it makes me laugh. I'm not good at being funny. But I'm also very interested in this idea that the Spartan women were raised to be tough in their own way, and only two types of Spartan men and women were actually given a burial site like we would think of one, and that's a man that died in battle or a woman that died giving birth to a child. That's, man, I almost used the word awesome, but it's not awesome, but it's kind of awesome. Again, history is complex and hard. Okay, let's take a quick breather and let's watch the following video. I'm going to have Miss McClary show this to you, I believe, and we will continue later.